Well, good morning. My name is Amy McGrath, and I have the great privilege of leading the K-12 portfolio for Arizona State University through a network of public charter schools serving students both in Arizona and in partnership with schools around the country, around the globe. We do that by leveraging ASU's deep engine of innovation to elevate outcomes, take what's working, and make it accessible for all. I've also had the great privilege of working closely with these three individuals on thinking about engagement and its correlation to elevating outcomes. So you might be thinking, this is an interesting crew to be thinking about education. What do these guys know about students falling behind or classrooms or the daily pressures of teaching? But these three creatives have shaped how millions of people think and learn through storytelling, through design, and through data. And that's what great educators do as well. We have the opportunity today to hopefully borrow from their playbook. So I'm gonna start first with Steve Levitt. Steve, can you just give us, from your perspective, what's broken in school today?
Well, let me just start by saying, you're right, Amy. Well, what do I know about schools? I mean, I've thought a lot about it. I've had a lot of kids. I've been teaching in higher education for 25 years. But I think if anything that I have to say is useful, my old friend Danny Kahneman used to talk about the outsider view and how it's often easier to see things that are broken from the outside than the inside. And my perspective is, as we've been launching a school, we're starting high schools now, is that we just started from the perspective of, if you were going to build a school from scratch, what would it look like? Rather than, here's what we have and we'd go. And to me, the thing that we struggle with the most right now is that it's just the history of an education system that started in the mid-1800s, built on a technology around a teacher in front of a classroom, which I don't think you would use that technology at all if you were starting from scratch. You just wouldn't have the idea that there should be a teacher teaching the same lesson to 25 or 30 kids at the same time. You'd be using technologies that we have now, which are much more bespoke and directed towards individual kids. And the other thing I think that troubles me when I look at the system is that I think we all agree about what we're trying to create, a set of kids who love learning, they're engaged, they're prepared for the world around them. But that is amorphous, and so we end up trying, we use a lot of metrics which are very imprecise in trying to do that. And in the end, as we've been trying to start a school, you see how all of those rules, like that a kid has to sit in a seat for a certain number of hours to get credit for science, like that has nothing to do with whether or not the kid understands science, and yet it gets in the way of other ways of teaching. So those are the two things that come to my mind, Amy.
Walter?
Well, I certainly agree about education not having changed in any fundamental ways. I'm not even sure I'd say the 1800s. I might say 2,000 years. I guess in my perception of it, and as a relative newcomer to all this, that it really comes down to engagement and attention. In other words, unless those doors are open, nothing happens. Part of my perception about this actually comes, you were mentioning your kids, from my kids. I have a daughter who is a demonstration teacher at the UCLA School of Education, and she teaches very young children. And she comes out of the Reggio Emilia tradition of inquiry-based learning. And I see what she is able to do with her kids. They once adopted a slug and spent about 4 weeks studying everything they could do about that slug. And when I saw the science that they were able to sort of master based on their emotional engagement with that particular creature, it was astounding to me. In fact, there's a paper about it you can look up called, I think it's called Science with Sluggy. Then my other input came from my son, a very brilliant kid, game designer and a screenwriter, who was incredibly ADHD. And those of us who have dealt with ADHD kids know that it's not a lack of attention necessarily, because when they're interested in something, you can't get them off it. Well, I would hold that we live in a media-saturated world that has made us all ADHD. And it's just the truth. And we keep on creating digital and electronic tools that hopefully will help, starting with AI, which has certainly overtaken everyone's conversation. And I think that what we have to decide is, okay, that's a fantastic thing. How are we going to deal with the ultimate issue, which has, to me, getting students engaged in learning and getting their attention? And we have found at Dreamscape that there are two ways, one main way to do that. We're all hardwired with something, it's called story. It doesn't mean we can all make stories, but everyone can respond to a story. And we're finding that as a source of intense engagement in education is proving to be extraordinarily helpful. The other thing I would say is that last time I checked, no one has ever answered a text while in a headset.
John.
Is this on? Yeah. Well, I was thinking when being asked onto this panel that I had no idea why I was going to be here, but as and it occurred to me there's a song once came to mind, the song "Once in a Lifetime" by David Byrne. It's like, how did I get in this beautiful house? I have this beautiful wife, and how did I get here? And it occurred to me there were three events in my life that kind of like were defining extraordinary events that I would kind of had a similar experience that I'm having right now, which is at one point I was working on a project, a book that I picked up called 7 Years in Tibet, and I went to the Dalai Lama's home in Dharamsala, and we had yak butter tea and Stampa, and we spent 2 hours talking as a group, a small group, in a subject that he was very interested in, concerned about, and knowledgeable about, of what was even this project I was working on, which was just felt like, how did that ever happen? And I think it's by the completely unexpected results of having been pursuing different interests. The second time that came up was when I went to, thanks to Walter Parks and his wife Laurie, to the Shrek Academy Awards night, and won the Academy Award for Best Animated Picture for the first time. But it was sort of a, how did I get here? What is it? But the third time is being right here, right now, because what I am is a fan of what the original, new, innovative education has been, and the work that Sal Khan has been doing with ASU, and what Steve Levitt is doing with the Levitt Lab, I think, and Walter doing with Dreamscape. I think these are just extraordinary, original, innovative programs that have real potential of inspiring kids and teachers and the whole system, creating an ecosystem that's completely different. I got a very progressive high school where I could pursue drama, Chinese history, religion, philosophy, independent studies, and then went to one college I applied to, which is Colorado College, which was a block plan with one course study at a time, one course every month, but it was total immersion, and I only wanted to go there because it was a original education approach that I thought was really compelling. But I just think the work that's being done by this group is extraordinary, and I'm just a fan, so that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Well, and John's being very humble because the first time John and I talked, he said, how do we create schools so we can have more movies like Shrek? And that's exactly what we need to do, is engage students so we get more creatives as the output. So kind of segueing into what is immersive learning, talking about storytelling and what that does to unlock learning in classrooms. Walter, we're going to tee up a video.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, we're going to put up just a few minutes. It's a shortened version. This is a little video that attends to, actually, if any of you have a chance to come and see our booth, our newest product, which is, we've completed introductory biology, and this is introductory chemistry, and it's just a little intro that's given by our subject matter expert, an extraordinary teacher and chemist named Ian Gould, President's Professor, talking a little bit about our approach to chemistry. So we could run that, and then we could talk a little bit about it.
My name's Ian Gould. I'm President's Professor in the School of Molecular Sciences here at Arizona State University. The biggest problem, I believe, is that students just don't like general chemistry. And you know what? It's not their fault. The problem is that general chemistry curriculum was really developed in the 60s, even the 50s, and at that time, you could get away with general chemistry being essentially an academic exercise for students. That's not serving students anymore. Right? Today's students, when they come to college, they want to feel they're going to contribute. They're going to contribute to society, or they're going to get a job, or they're going to feel like they have something useful to do. And general chemistry curriculum just hasn't kept up with that. So students don't need more chemistry. What they need more of is seeing how chemistry is relevant.
Welcome to the Institute for Telepresent Exploration.
This is a completely different way of teaching the subject. It doesn't just give them a narrative, it immerses them in that narrative. Right? It's not just showing them something, it's putting them in that place.
Let's get started.
So the way this works is the students will have a VR experience, like 10 or 15 minutes, and then they take that and then spend 2 hours in the lab working on materials connected to the VR. And when the students go into the lab after the Dreamscape, they will see a sample on their lab bench, which comes directly from the narrative that they were in, right? That's something that no student has experienced before.
The only thing standing between us and a digital apocalypse, some salt crystals and a single hair. Thankfully, science allows us to turn minuscule clues into major revelations.
So by integrating the labs and the story, the students really find a need to know, right? They find like a need to what's going on in the lab because it connects to what they just experienced, and they know is going to connect to the next one too. So that increases the level of engagement in the lab in a way that just isn't possible any other way.
All right, tell us a little bit about Dreamscape Learn and what is it doing in classrooms?
Well, as Ian says, it is about, as I said before, engagement. We do not see the use of VR as a sort of a full-scale migration to something called the metaverse. What we use VR for is a way to really connect our students to a particular story, and in solving the issues of that story, have a reason to learn. I mean, I think, Steve, you might have introduced me to this concept, or we talked about it once, just-in-case learning versus just-in-time learning. I mean, all of us went to biology classes or chemistry classes and learned about cell signaling or learned about how atoms work, assuming one time in my life that would be important. And I have not found many times it was important to know how to cut open a fish. So two things comes out of Dreamscape. If I'm involved in a narrative in which to save a creature or to solve a problem or come to the successful end of a story, requires me to understand I'm learning that in a context on behalf of solving that problem that I'm emotionally engaged in. And the other thing we try to do is focus in on what my colleagues talk about, as you all do, transferable skills. I mean, science is not so much about how to pour something in the test tube. Science is increasingly about how to deal with data, how to model data, how to collaborate with people. And we really look very closely at the sorts of standards suggested by different institutions and have tried to sort of move our pedagogy towards what is relevant in this century. I think it's all about teaching what is relevant and also teaching in our students' native language.
Yeah, I've appreciated listening to the three of you talk, and a common underpinning theme beyond storytelling has been data, something that Steve has gone deep in. Steve, talk a little bit about how, from a behavioral economics lens, we push through systemic barriers.
I don't know. I'm not sure I have anything good to say about that, Amy, but let me answer a question I can answer better. Responding to you, Walter, it just reminded me of a story when I was co-teaching, and on the first day of class, the other professor, in a very stern way, turned to the group and said, "If I ever catch you on your computers playing games or texting during class, you fail the class." And I stood up after him. I said, if I ever am so unengaging as a teacher and the message I'm trying to give you is so boring that you would rather be playing games on computer, please do it, because it's my job as an educator to come up with something that you care about more than the game. And in some ways, that's the fundamental, I think that's, it's almost like a fundamental choice you have to make when you approach education is, are the kids going to play by your rules, or are you going to play by their rules? And I think that's where storytelling and data, they all come together. In fact, look, there's nothing more boring than statistics and data analysis about a problem you don't care about. But if you find the problem that a particular kid cares about, maybe it's a slug. For me, it was betting on thoroughbred horses. So, when I was in high school, even though it was illegal for me to do it, I wasn't old enough, the only thing I cared about was trying to figure out who's going to win the next race. And I learned every data tool I know now because data was a way that I thought I might be able to do it. So I think that's the spirit in which it's kind of, look, I think data are really important. And behavioral economics, they're all important, but somehow it's almost about to me, more about a mindset of where you start. And if you start at that position where, really your position, Walter, where are the kids? Who are they? What are they like? And then you build a world around them, knowing that you want to move them from the things 14-year-olds care about to the things that will, give them fulfilling, interesting, socially productive lives.
I just need that. I love to ask any of that. I just loved hearing one of the great data minds and kind of thinkers of our time start by saying, I want to tell you a story. Think about that. And that's a great story. That is the most concise way and the most engaging way you could have possibly expressed to us a very complex idea, which is that it's really not about the kids' lack of attention, it's really about the teacher's responsibility. All of that was encoded in that story. This was a perfect example of the power of story in education. And it really, I just sort of believe that given the amount of data that's floating around in our heads, given the amount of inputs, we need to find every tool we have to keep students engaged. Now, there's been a lot of work in gamification for certain things. It's fantastic. I have learned one thing, which is that there are many kinds of learners. There are learners who have a great intuitive, computational brain, who have aesthetic sense, have spatial, emotional intelligence, athletic, et cetera, et cetera. It's very hard to teach all of those kinds of kids, to say nothing about kids that come from vastly different socioeconomic backgrounds. But I have found that pretty much everybody responds to a good story. So if there's a way that we can wrap these difficult subjects, not to the detriment of the educational, discipline, but rather use it as a way of engagement, we can open the tent for students who don't think of themselves as science learners in a way we never could before.
I'd like to push just a little bit on how you were kind of talking about boredom and how you're trying to incent kids to pay attention. I've appreciated how you talk about skewed incentives and test scores as a wedge. Talk a little bit about rules that are worth breaking when building a school model.
So, I come from higher education, and I had this funny comment, another story. So I was talking with Hank Green.
Let me tell you a story.
Yeah. So Hank Green is, of the Green brothers, and they do crash course and whatnot. And so they've spent all of their time for the last 15 years really aimed at a high school audience. And then they decided that if they really thought the system was broken, and they partnered with ASU to try to then go and change the way we do college courses. And it was interesting because Hank Green didn't know anything about college, but he felt like high school was so broken that he couldn't possibly fix high school, he better go fix college. And I've taught for 25 years at the university level, and I feel like that's so broken I can't even begin to fix it, so I'm gonna go try and get high school. So it's a little worrisome that the people who know a lot about an area are afraid to try to fix it. But what was really shocking to me as we've been partnering with ASU is how many rules there are around what kids have to do, and it limits your ability to even to get started. Like the seat time issue, the idea that you only know science if you spend a certain amount of time in a seat. So, look, I'm very much in favor of rule breaking, and as we've tried to launch our school, Amy at ASU, there are two ways to think about it. You can learn the rules and then try and pick and choose which ones to break. But I have a different view, which is, look, I don't even want to know the rules, okay? I do not want to know the rules. I want to set this up the way we want it, and then I want to surround myself with a bunch of people who are just going to figure out how to break all those rules. And I don't even want to know what the rules are that got broken. I would just like to know that in the end, we ignored the rules. And that is look, I understand it's a little bit dangerous perspective, but I think, I really look at the complexity of high school education system and all of the barriers. And I've come to believe the only hope you have is just to have a lot of radical people going out and doing radical things and hoping that somehow something will catch and will start to spill over. I think my own sense is if you try to tackle the system of what we have, it is too overpowering, and it is too strong and too entrenched to have any hope. And so I think the question is, how can you fiddle around on the edges in a way that will begin to trickle down into the system is the only way to make change, is my sense.
Yeah, I'd say if you are an educator in the room or you're building new models, I challenge you to surround yourself with people who don't know about education because they ask really simple questions like, why? Over and over and over until you just start breaking the rules to design something good. John, over to you. I'd love to hear how do you think about, first of all, I know your passion for creativity and how the current traditional system is crushing creativity in kids. So how do you design for belonging and not just novelty?
I would say that as a starting point, right now, when you look at the news today, what's really clear is that there's no way of predicting where the markets are going to go tomorrow, next week, next year, and the job markets are going to be equally impossible to predict right now. The world picture is so dramatically shifting like right now that education trying to guess what the future job prospects are and the training is almost impossible. And so the focus seems to be, I read that some Yale study about high school students had said recently that 75% of kids are feeling extremely bored or unengaged and dislike their high school experience. And I think that it seems to call out that the whole thing that the con world schools, the con schools, what Levitt Lab and otherwise are trying to do is create an environment where kids are engaged and inspired, and that is the best thing. And a safe place and a place they want to be. That seems like the ultimate test, that they want to do the learning that they're getting, they're pursuing things that they're interested in. You can't just make it be what, as Ken Robinson said, this industrial model, it just doesn't apply. There's everybody, it's a widget making, and it throws out, there's so many people who are disengaged. It's got to be an experiential change, and what we all had, those teachers and courses that were inspiring, sometimes they're few and far between, depending on one's experiences, but they are there, and that's the hardest thing to get, is what turns kids on, and that will keep people lifelong learners, and that gives it, I think, a perpetual prospect.
Could I? I mean, John, that is so, it's such an insightful thing to say. It just reminds me when I first started teaching at the University of Chicago, I had this sense that I was required to teach the kids a set of skills that they would use and remember. And that is the overriding force that we have in high school. Like, there's almost a desperation to make sure that the kids can do algebra, geometry, calculus, that they know a set of facts, whatever it is. And it was at the 5-year reunion of my first class of students, when they came back, that I sat down and we had beers, and I asked them some really simple questions on the content of the class that I had taught them. There's something called the Lagrangian. It's the most basic thing that you teach kids in advanced, in intermediate, micro. And not a single one of them, 12 of them around the table, could even begin to solve the problem that had been the centerpiece of this class 5 years earlier. And as I pressed them on content, I realized not one of them remembered anything about the content on the courses. And I said, well, what do you remember about the course? And one of them said, oh my God, I remember the time that you forgot to pick your kid up from daycare, and you said your wife was going to kill you because of that. And it's to your point, Walter, about storytelling. And it was a transformational moment for me, because I actually, at that moment, I stopped trying to worry about anything my kids, any of my students would remember about the actual content. And all I tried to do was to engage them on ideas. And I think it's this point where if they're when you're interested in something, when you're engaged, if you're equipped with the set of skills that allow you to learn what you need to learn in that moment, the just-in-time learning, that's all you really need. And the obsession with the facts and the details and the proofs about triangles, it isn't important that they remember exactly what, being congruent to some other thing matters. It's that they have a strategy and a desire to learn things. And it's easy to forget that when your job is at the end of a certain amount of time to give a kid an A, a B, or a C, and it depends somehow on that. And so that's, I think, one of the hardest things to remember is what the actual goal should be of education once you get deep into it.
I want to add something to that based on something you said earlier, which is that all that's true, but particularly for high schools, there are colleges they want to get into, and there are placement exams they have to take, and there's competencies they have to show, and they have teachers who have been taught in a certain way. And therefore, the role of innovation, particularly in high school, has to be dealt with in a very nuanced way. It cannot be about thinking you can pull up the railroad tracks. I think it has to do with saying, understanding what are the givens and how can you innovate within those givens. So in our case, well, we have to learn the essentials of chemistry. Maybe you learn it in the old way where you sort of scaffold it, and teach orbitals and this and that, or can you create a narrative which goes to the same learning goals, but does it in a different organic way. You have teachers who have taught a certain way, who are very talented. So you can't expect that teacher to necessarily say, I'm not teaching that way anymore, but rather provide materials that are enlivening and that fit on top of a more conventional way of teaching. My team over there will grin because they've heard this so often. There's something I used to say in movies, which is the more exotic the scenery, the more comfortable the chair. Meaning if you do, in my case, the Men in Black movies, well, they were cop movies. So as long as you understood that genre, you could go way out there with comedy and with imagination because you felt settled. I think it's important in education that we keep the chair somewhat comfortable for administrators and for teachers and bring our innovations to kind of broaden the horizons as opposed to think that we're in a position to change the rules.
So we have just 2 minutes left. As we think about the avalanche of emergent technology, I think all of us have expressed the concern that imagination is at stake for kids if we don't design the right models. So briefly, the three of you, what is your hope for the future of education? Just that.
Wow. There's every now and then we all remember that moment when you felt an actual visceral connection to an idea, moment in the book, a teacher, a discussion. And those become few and far between, and I believe they tend to be drowned out by an onslaught of media. So my hope is that somehow that we're able to take that same media and turn it into a force of attention and engagement.
If I have to think about education more broadly, my hope would be that we would spend more time teaching kids about things they'll use in their life than things that the last time they'll use them is on the exam that they do it. So related to things like mental health and data as well. But there's so many things that we use. I mean, everything that's turned out to be valuable in my adult life, it wasn't things I learned in a classroom. There were many things I learned when I was a student. I learned from teachers, but I think it's an accident that the set of topics we teach, I think, is accidental, and I would like to move towards a set of topics which actually will help people function and thrive in life.
And I would just say the Holy Grail seems to be finding a place, an environment where kids can find their enthusiasm, their interests and passions, explore different things, and want to be there and feel encouraged in an environment that inspires them and their friends, and it's a much more well-rounded, full experience that they're walking away with, and where a place they want to go.
Awesome. Huge amount of gratitude for these three being here. Thank you all for this great day.